In 2009, just months after Michael Jackson's death, the FBI did something they almost never do. They released 333 pages of documents about the King of Pop, heavily redacted pages, blacked out names, entire sections marked classified. But here's what nobody talks about those 333 pages. They're just what they chose to release. Former FBI agents who worked these cases have started talking, and what they're saying contradicts almost everything in those official documents. Because the real FBI files on Michael Jackson, the ones still locked away, tell a completely different story. A story about international surveillance, covert operations, and discoveries so explosive that even now, 15 years after his death, the government won't let you see them. I'm about to show you what's really in those files. Most people think the FBI only investigated Michael Jackson because of the allegations. That's what they want you to believe. The truth? They've been watching him since 1984. Let's go back to where this actually started. February 27th, the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. Michael's filming the Pepsi commercial when his hair catches fire. You've seen the footage, the pyrotechnics malfunction. Michael's in agony, rushed to the hospital with second and third degree burns. What you haven't seen? The FBI memo written 3 days later. In that memo, marked confidential, and only partially released in 2009, an agent notes something strange. Several witnesses reported seeing someone tampering with the pyrotechnic equipment before the shoot. But here's where it gets interesting. The FBI interviewed these witnesses, took their statements, and then nothing. The investigation was suddenly closed. No follow-up, no explanation. A retired special agent who worked in the LA field office during this period spoke anonymously to a music journalist in 2019. He said something that should chill you. "We were told to watch Jackson, not protect him. There's a difference." Think about that. The FBI knew something was wrong with that commercial shoot, had witness testimony, and instead of investigating potential sabotage of America's biggest star, they opened a surveillance file. Why? The answer is in what Michael was doing that nobody was paying attention to. While the world saw him as the guy who made Thriller, the FBI saw something else entirely. By 1985, Michael Jackson wasn't just a musician. He was becoming one of the most powerful businessmen in entertainment. And that's when he made the move that put a target on his back. August 14th, Michael purchases the ATV music catalog for $47.5 million. Overnight, he owns the rights to 251 Beatles songs, plus thousands of other tracks. It's brilliant business. But according to documents obtained through FOIA requests years later, the FBI opened a financial investigation within 2 weeks of the purchase. Why would the FBI care about a music catalog purchase? Here's what those partially redacted documents reveal. The FBI was concerned about foreign influence in American cultural assets. That's government speak. What they really meant was that Michael, a black man, now controlled a significant portion of British and American musical heritage. And they wanted to know who was advising him, who was financing him, and what his intentions were. One document, with nearly 80% of the content redacted, has a visible subject line: Jackson, Michael Joseph, potential threats to cultural security. Cultural security. Let that sink in. The FBI created a classification for a pop star buying song rights. But the surveillance intensified for another reason. Michael started talking. He began making statements about racism in the music industry, about how black artists were systematically underpaid, about how record labels were modern plantations. Strong words, dangerous words, if you're the establishment. An FBI memo, mostly redacted but with key phrases visible, mentions monitoring Jackson's inflammatory rhetoric regarding industry practices and his potential to incite civil unrest among African American youth. They weren't investigating a criminal. They were watching someone they considered a threat to the social order. And then Michael did something that escalated everything. He started leaving the country. A lot. Michael Jackson traveled to 35 countries. Every trip was documented. Every meeting was logged. The FBI's international surveillance files on Michael Jackson reportedly exceed 1,000 pages. Only 89 of those pages have ever been released, and most are so heavily redacted they're virtually useless. But we know some things. In 1989, Michael visited the Soviet Union. He met with political leaders, he was photographed with military officials. An FBI cable from the Moscow embassy, partially declassified, expresses concern over Jackson's unauthorized diplomatic engagement. Unauthorized diplomatic engagement. Michael wasn't representing the U.S. government, but he was representing something American culture, Black excellence, artistic freedom, and that made intelligence agencies nervous. A former CIA analyst who worked in cultural affairs during this period gave an interview to a podcast in 2021. He said, Michael Jackson had more soft power in some regions than the entire State Department. When he went to certain countries, hundreds of thousands of people showed up. Presidents met with him. That's influence. And influence, when it's not controlled, is monitored. The FBI files contain repeated references to Jackson's meetings with foreign officials, but almost every name is redacted. Every location detail blacked out. Why? If these were innocent diplomatic courtesy visits, why classify them decades later? Here's what we do know from unredacted portions. The FBI tracked his movements through Interpol. They maintained files on his business associates in Japan, Germany, and the UK. They flagged his charitable donations to international organizations as requiring monitoring. One particularly disturbing document shows the FBI requested financial records from multiple foreign banks where Michael had accounts. They were building a profile. But for what? The answer might lie in what happened next, when the allegations started, and suddenly the FBI's role became very, very public. The first allegations against Michael surface. Immediately, the FBI gets involved. Officially, they're assisting local law enforcement. But read the documents closely, they tell a different story. The released FBI files contain multiple memos about the investigation. What's strange? The dates. Several memos discussing allegations against Jackson are dated before the accusations became public. How were FBI agents writing about allegations that hadn't been reported yet? A legal researcher who analyzed the FBI files for a documentary in 2018 found something nobody's really talked about: cross-references. Reference previous intelligence and ongoing surveillance. These aren't the words you use when you're starting a fresh investigation. These are the words you use when you're adding new information to an existing file. The FBI had been watching Michael for nearly a decade before the first allegation. And when those allegations came, they already had hundreds of pages documenting his life, his business, his travels, his associations. But here's what's truly bizarre. In 2004, during the second major trial, the FBI searched Michael's Neverland Ranch. They seized computers, documents, hard drives. A forensic analysis was conducted. The results? According to the lead FBI forensic examiner who testified, they found nothing, no illegal material, no evidence of wrongdoing in the areas they were investigating. That examiner's full report was never made public. When defense attorneys requested it during discovery, portions were deemed not relevant to the case by prosecutors. Not relevant? The FBI conducted a massive digital forensic investigation of the defendant's property, and the full results aren't relevant? An attorney who worked on the defense team spoke about this years later. He said they believed the FBI found something, just not what they were looking for. He suspected they found financial records, international communications, business dealings information that had nothing to do with the criminal case, but everything to do with Michael's business empire and international connections. That information was never entered into evidence. It was classified, and it remains classified. Which brings us to the final piece: what happened after the trial and what the FBI might still be hiding. Michael Jackson was acquitted on all charges in 2005. He left the United States shortly after and spent several years abroad. The FBI closed their official investigation. Or did they? Documents from 2006 and 2007, barely visible through redactions, show continued FBI activity. Subject lines reference: Jackson, Michael, ongoing monitoring, and international financial activity, continued review. Michael was out of the country, cleared of all charges, yet the FBI was still watching. Why? Here's a theory based on the patterns in the documents. Michael Jackson, by the mid-2000s, owned or had stakes in music catalogs worth over $1 billion. He had business relationships in a dozen countries. He was planning a massive comeback tour that would generate hundreds of millions in revenue, and he was increasingly speaking about issues of artist rights, label corruption, and industry exploitation. One partially visible memo from 2008 mentions concern over Jackson's planned business restructuring and potential industry disruption. They weren't watching a criminal. They were watching someone who had the power, money, and platform to fundamentally change how the music industry operated. And then, June 25th, 2009, Michael Jackson died. Within hours, the FBI's Los Angeles field office dispatched agents to the scene. Standard procedure for a high-profile death? Maybe. But according to an LAPD officer who was there that day, FBI agents arrived before some local detectives. They were in Michael's house, looking through his office, his files. What were they looking for? After Michael's death, several items from his home went missing. Business documents, hard drives, personal files. The estate's attorneys later confirmed that certain materials they knew existed could not be located. Were they taken, lost, destroyed? No one's saying. And this is where we arrive at the uncomfortable truth. The FBI released 333 pages about Michael Jackson. By their own admission in FOIA response letters, they have over 700 pages. Where are the other 400 plus pages? Freedom of Information Act requests for the remaining documents have been denied repeatedly. The reasons given: national security, ongoing investigation, and this is real, potential harm to international relations. Michael Jackson died in 2009. It's been over 15 years. What investigation could possibly still be ongoing? What international relations could be harmed by releasing files about a deceased pop star? Unless those files aren't really about criminal investigations. Unless they're about surveillance of a black man who became too powerful, too influential, and too outspoken. Unless they're about how the FBI monitored an artist who dared to challenge the systems that controlled American music and culture. Several civil rights attorneys have argued that the Michael Jackson FBI files represent a continuation of COINTELPRO-style surveillance targeting influential African-American figures not for criminal activity, but for their cultural and political impact. Here's what we know is in those unreleased files, based on references in the released documents: complete financial surveillance records, international travel logs with details of meetings and contacts, communications intercepts. Yes, they were listening. Business association maps connecting Michael to hundreds of individuals, analysis of his potential for inciting social unrest. These aren't criminal investigation files. This is an intelligence dossier on an American citizen whose only crime was being extraordinarily successful and increasingly unwilling to stay quiet about corruption and inequality. And here's the most disturbing part. In 2019, an attorney filed a FOIA lawsuit demanding the release of all remaining FBI documents on Michael Jackson. The case was dismissed. The judge's reasoning? Releasing the documents could compromise law enforcement techniques and reveal intelligence gathering methods. Michael Jackson has been dead for over 15 years. There are no ongoing prosecutions, no active investigations. Yet the FBI insists these files must remain secret to protect their methods. What methods? What were they doing that they can't let us see, even now? The FBI files on Michael Jackson that you can read tell a story of investigations that went nowhere. But the files you can't read, those 400 plus pages still locked away, they tell a different story. A story about surveillance, power, and what happens when someone gets too big, too influential, and too willing to speak truth. Michael Jackson spent his final years talking about conspiracy, about being watched, about powerful forces trying to silence him. A lot of people called him paranoid, but when the FBI has hundreds of classified pages about you spanning 25 years, maybe you're not paranoid. Maybe you're just informed. The question isn't whether the FBI was watching Michael Jackson. The released documents prove they were. The question is, what did they find that they still can't let us see? If you want to see more untold stories about the King of Pop and the truth behind the headlines, subscribe to King of Pop and hit that notification bell. These stories need to be told, and I'm just getting started.